Laves-Webb, and I'm sitting here with Susan Miller, who's a senior associate at Laves-Webb and Associates. And we want to talk to you today about stress. With the election coming up and all the different conversations around politics and Biden and Trump and what's happening and who's right and who's wrong, and there's just a lot of stress in the air, a lot of big feelings in the air. And so I wanted to get your sense of, when you're working with somebody, or for even people out there, how do we know when our stress levels are kind of overreactive, or at a place that starts to become a little concerning or worrisome for us?
I find that usually your first inkling that you're suffering from more anxiety is the feeling your body has. Your whole body feels more tense. And you tend to be hyper aware of what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell my clients, listen to what your body's telling you.
I like that. Yeah. So it really just shows up in your body and kind of what you're holding.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And then then when you do notice you're more stressed, I notice anger too, right? I think that comes up.
Especially right now.
Yeah, especially right now. And so I see a lot of people that are expressing anger or feeling anger in their body.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so, what do you know? Yeah, do you see anger too? And
yeah, I see anger. I see anxiety. I see fear, a lot of fear as well.
Okay.
But generally, people hit anger first when they're recognizing an emotion. They can usually label anger first. And so I always ask them to, okay, anger. Yeah, that's within bounds, it's pretty acceptable emotion in our society.
Mm-hmm.
I ask them to stop and think, what's underneath the anger?
Mm-hmm.
What's making you say you're angry?
Mm-hmm.
Is it fear? Is it fear for the future? Is it sadness? Is it a feeling of loss of control? So that's when someone tells me they're angry about what's going on, I ask them to look deeper, because anger's a good blanket emotion.
It is, yeah. And like you said, it's acceptable.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, and it's less vulnerable.
Exactly.
Right? I think is the main thing is that, and so what happens for a lot of people is they feel helpless, they get angry.
Mm-hmm.
They feel overwhelmed, they get angry. They feel scared, they get angry.
Yep.
And so anger, like you said, it can be this blanket for a lot of different kinds of emotion. And so I view it almost as a secondary emotion.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right.
I think it often is, yes.
And why do you imagine this, and maybe it's always the case, but it seems around this election that a sense of fear is coming up so much right now.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you imagine that is? What, and I think if we dig deeper than because of Trump or because of Biden, it seems like it's more in the fabric of something that these two people maybe represent, or where our country is going represents. What is your take on that?
I think people feel a loss of control with their own lives. We've had runaway inflation. People can't afford to keep their pets anymore. They worry about feeding their children. They're worried about being able to pay the rent.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this loss of control. Mm-hmm. And I think this political climate is a offshoot of that feeling of loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
People don't feel in control of their own lives.
Right.
Especially the poor and the middle class, particularly the middle class, because middle class have had it pretty good in the past, and now we don't feel any sense of control. Yeah. We have no faith that we're going to have a decent future.
And so you're saying that the economic instability, uncertainty creates that loss of control. I'm also, I get the impression a lot of people, in terms of social, social justice issues, and then self-efficacy issues, like you're talking about, a woman's right to choose, things like that. These are also areas that obviously are very meaningful for many people, and there's that sense of, I don't know that I can control this, or being out of control. And you're saying that brings up the fear.
Yeah, that brings up the fear, because whenever you have a loss of control, it's fear kicks in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we're operating from our sympathetic nervous system, where it's fight, flight, freeze, or we don't know what to do. We know we have fear, but we don't have control of the outcome. Yes, you could run away, but what's that going to mean for me? I can freeze and try and ignore, what's going on, or I can fight it.
Or you can fight it, yeah. So you're saying there's this trauma reaction that we're having on a macro level.
Yes.
And we're getting in touch
so.
with that fight or freeze.
Yeah.
Like you would in other traumatic situations for the people experience.
Yeah.
And for some reason that's happening on a macro level. Now, do you think and I know it's kind of a touchy area, but do you think the personalities of the respective candidates bring up some of that instability or encourage some of that instability? And I'm not judging one or the other. I'm just saying, given, I've heard things about ages, I've heard things about, cognitive abilities, I've heard things about, different pathologies. Do you think some of those things are adding fuel to the fire?
Yeah, I think they are adding fuel to the fire. And, social media over the years has become a bigger and bigger player, right? Most people get their news from social media.
Right.
And very few people fact check, right? And so things are happening so quickly, emotionally, you're bouncing all over the place, right? Especially if social media tends to be your main form of information.
Right.
So that is also playing into the difference between these two candidates.
Yeah, so there's a freneticness, bounciness that's happening kind of all the time. And then lastly, what if somebody does notice they're feeling an extra amount of fear or anxiety or catastrophic thinking or just feeling worried about the future? What advice do you have as a therapist? Like what do we tell clients? What can they do to help take care of themselves, to just kind of get through the day or get through the week, or prioritize things that are more important to them and not neglect what's in their lives because of their own anxieties or fears?
Yeah. I find journaling helps a lot of people.
Okay.
Writing about what they're feeling, because it gives voice to that rather than it being something nebulous. They can write it specifically what they're feeling, which often leads them to understand why they're feeling that.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
And it's probably a safer context to do it
Yeah.
within the context of a diary or journaling.
Yeah. Because you're not confronting somebody else.
Right.
And then, I always talk to them about, breathing techniques, being mindful. What are some things that you tell your clients about dealing with it?
What comes up for me a lot of times, when it comes to this is I use kind of the baseball soccer analogy is what I call it. And what that means is, like if there's one out and you're playing baseball and you're playing shortstop and there's a runner on first, and they hit you a ground ball, there's only one play. You pick up the ball and you throw it to second base to try to get a double play.
Yeah.
And whether you're playing Little League or whether you're playing for the Yankees, that's the play. So the only question is whether or not you're going to get it right or not, if you're going to be successful. But if you're playing soccer and the score is 1-1 and there's 25 minutes left in the first half and you're at midfield and you get the ball, what should you do? And there's no answer for that.
No.
You got to improvise. And I think oftentimes our environment politically is like soccer.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know the specific answer. I don't know what I should do. I don't know how to be successful. And so it takes a lot of improvisation. It takes a lot of recalibration. It takes getting information or obtaining information and pivoting. And that in turn, and a lot of that is internal, right? Our emotional bandwidth. And so we have to have the ability to, just like in soccer, you have to be able to dribble, you have to be able to shoot, you have to be able to pass, you have to be able to regulate your emotions, you have to be able to ask for help, you have to be able to advocate to get your needs met, you have to, have a support system. And so all of those things becoming really important, and what should you do at any given time depends. You have to improvise that.
Yeah, and I've noticed that my women clients and my friends who are gay couples are
Mhm.
really concerned. They have a higher level of anxiety.
Alright, so for females in GLBTQ community,
Yeah.
you're seeing a higher level of
Higher
anxiety.
level anxiety, yeah.
And why do you imagine that is?
I think they're looking at the political climate as if a certain candidate gets in, that they may lose their rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that creates even greater anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. So the fear becomes
The
more.
fear becomes
Yeah.
more.
And that's when you get into the lack of control.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I have a number of clients who are either talking about moving,
Yeah.
or who have moved.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
And that's that flight, like.
Yeah.
And that just shows you the significance and the seriousness that this brings up from a mental health perspective.
Oh yeah. I've talked to a lot of people who are talking about looking at moving to other countries if
Mhm.
the political,
Mhm.
if the expected political outcome happens,
Mhm.
they're concerned about
Mhm.
democracy, right?
Yeah. Well, and
And-
I think it also brings up a question because it is that sense, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
talk to people that are pro-Trump
Mhm.
supporters, and then I talk to people that are pro-Biden
Mhm.
supporters, and they're both basically saying if the other candidate's elected, it threatens democracy.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same
and-
story both
And,
ways.
yeah, and I've never heard that before. I've heard
I
I don't
haven't
like this candidate for whatever reason, or I want this issue is important to me and this candidate doesn't support that. But I've never heard this is a threat to our democracy. And so it kind of speaks to that amygdala. We're in that flight or fight
Mhm.
mode, or freeze mode in a way that I think is really tangible and requires really taking care of your mental health.
Yes, yeah.
You know?
You have to be mentally healthy, but also know who you are
Mm-hmm.
and what level of anxiety can I handle with this,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Can I just go, okay, no matter what, I'm gonna work through this?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I go with my, primitive brain and flee
And
or
react
fight
or fight.
or
Mhm.
or freeze and do
And-
nothing?
And so it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah,
We
I think
need to ask for help.
Mhm.
Because this is a macro event,
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes it even more important that we ask for help.
Yeah.
So, who would you recommend? Where would you go for help?
I mean, obviously, I think having a supportive, therapist can be really helpful during this time. In the sense of like journaling, it's your own private space to talk about things that are, quite frankly, difficult to talk about. I mean, we're talking about politics and religion being two hot buttons, right?
Mhm.
And so it's very difficult to talk about that kind of in mixed company, or
Mhm.
even in the context of, an intimate relationship. It can be often difficult to talk about, or with children. I mean, and so it gives you a space to really give voice to something, find your own voice, talk about some of your anxieties, things like that. Plus, it's also, I think, representative, meaning that I think there's so much projection that happens from our past that gets projected onto the image of the presidency.
Yeah.
Right? Whether we're talking about father issues, mother issues, issues related to power, etc. And that can be important to look at. Oh, when I was in third grade, X, Y, and Z happened with my parents. This happened, and this reminds me of this experience. And so I think that can be helpful. It's interesting because generally I would say friends are great support, but on some level it can kind of perpetuate the problem in this instance because we're in this echo chamber, and so everybody's afraid, and you're aligned with people that support your political affiliation. It can be really helpful, and at the same time it can perpetuate the fear.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's this conundrum of yes, get support, and then it also can perpetuate some of the mental health concerns that typically it wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so, it's a tricky area at this time.
Yeah, because so they talk about mob mentality, but
Right.
if you're with your group of friends who all see the same thing
Mm-hmm.
and support the same thing, you don't get that outside view,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And like you said, it just perpetuates. In fact, it can it can exacerbate it.
Yeah, if everyone's afraid, and then, well, here we go.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Sue, thank you so much for talking about this. Obviously, this is a very important topic. It's very present in our society. And whenever you're ready to move to Belize, you just let me know. And we're out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
So much.